Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've always been protective of my younger sister. She's 3 years younger than me and has been into running since she was little. While I focused on martial arts, she found her passion in track and cross country. Our parents have always supported our different interests, and we've been each other's biggest cheerleaders. This story happened last spring when my sister was training for the state cross-country championships. She had to qualify through local competitions first, and there was this one race that I'll never forget. Not because of my sister's performance, but because of what happened afterward. I was there to support her at the local qualifying race. It was a beautiful day, perfect for running, and my sister was in high spirits as she got ready at school. That's when everything started going downhill. This woman approached my sister while she was stretching. She asked my sister if she was entering the race that day. When my sister confirmed she was, the woman declared that her child was going to enter and win. My sister just laughed politely and wished her daughter good luck. That's when things got weird. The woman started screaming, accusing my sister of laughing at her daughter and questioning if my sister thought her daughter wasn't eligible to race. My sister tried to calm her down, explaining that she'd never even seen her daughter. This only made the woman more furious. She started ranting about how my sister must think she's too popular to know her daughter. When my sister attempted to ask her to lower her voice, the woman screamed at her not to tell her what to do. My sister tried to leave, explaining that her ears were sensitive to loud noises. That's when the woman made her first threat. She told my sister that if she didn't let her daughter win, she would break her leg. My sister just brushed it off with an "okay, whatever," and walked away. Just before the race began, my sister was warming up when she noticed this woman giving her death stares. Being the kind person she is, my sister actually went up to ask what was wrong. The woman repeated her threat, pointing to her daughter and insisting that my sister better let her win, or she'd break her leg. My sister tried to defuse the situation by calmly agreeing, but this just made the woman angrier about my sister's attitude. My sister just said okay and walked away, while the woman responded by giving her the middle finger. The race started, and my sister took the lead right from the beginning. It was a 2-kilometer cross-country course, and she was in her element. I watched proudly as she maintained her lead and crossed the finish line first. After congratulating her, I told her I was going to grab some snacks and asked her to wait for me. That's when everything went completely sideways. When I returned about 5 minutes later, I found my sister crying in pain on a bench, her leg bleeding. A bystander quickly filled me in on what had happened. The woman had stormed up to my sister, screaming about how dare she win the race and upset her daughter, questioning if my sister had any feelings at all. Her daughter tried to calm her down, whispering that it didn't matter, but the woman insisted it did matter. She brought up the popularity thing again and accused my sister of disrespecting her daughter. When my sister tried to calm her down again, the woman just got more enraged, telling her not to dare tell her what to do. Then she actually grabbed my sister and threw her down onto some rocks. There was a loud snap when my sister's leg hit the ground. The woman looked satisfied and mockingly told my sister to enjoy the state cross-country meet. Through her tears and pain, my sister asked what the woman's problem was. The woman's daughter helped my sister onto a bench and apologized profusely for her mother's behavior, begging for forgiveness. But her mother just got angry at her too, telling her daughter not to apologize to the witch who didn't let her win. When I heard what happened, I asked someone to call an ambulance since my phone was in the car. Then I walked up to this woman and punched her as hard as I could. She went down immediately. The police and ambulance arrived shortly after. I had to pay a fine for punching her, but it was worth it. During their investigation, the police found drugs in her car, and she was charged with child abuse on top of that. My sister couldn't compete in the state championships because of her broken leg, but our mom took that woman to court. Not only did we win damages for medical expenses and pain and suffering, but the woman ended up serving time for the assault and drug possession. Her daughter went to live with her father, who turned out to be a much more stable parent. After graduating with my business degree and finding the job market completely saturated, I ended up taking what I thought would be a temporary position at a pet insurance company's customer service department. 2 years later, I was still there, handling calls from pet owners who ranged from absolutely delightful to completely unhinged. Anyone who's worked in customer service knows it's not for the faint of heart. You're basically a human punching bag for things completely outside your control. Accounting made a mistake, you get yelled at. Policy writers change something, that somehow you're full too. But nothing could have prepared me for my encounter with what I now call the Great Policy Cancellation Incident. It started as any other Monday morning. I'd already handled 3 calls about premium increases and one about a declined claim when my phone rang again. I answered with my usual cheerful greeting, introducing myself and offering assistance. The response I got was an immediate huff and an aggravated tone that made me want to pour myself a stronger coffee. The woman, who I'll call Karen, snapped at me about how long she'd been waiting and demanded to switch her policy immediately. I politely asked for her policy number, which she rattled off like she was firing bullets. I pulled up her file and saw she had a large senior dog who'd been to the vet just the day before. Karen immediately launched into complaints about how useless her current policy was, explaining that it didn't cover what her aging dog needed anymore. She insisted on switching to a better policy. I took a deep breath, already knowing where this was heading. I carefully explained that while I could help her explore other policy options, any condition diagnosed during yesterday's vet visit would be considered pre-existing and wouldn't be covered under a new policy. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her blood pressure rising through the phone. She began arguing, insisting that she needed all of her dog's conditions covered, everything, and demanded that I make it cheaper too. I calmly explained her options. She could either keep her current policy, which covered several conditions for her dog, or switch to a new policy. However, I made it clear that with any new policy, conditions diagnosed in the past 2 years wouldn't be covered. She accused us of trying to scam her and demanded that we switch her policy while covering everything. I apologetically explained that I didn't make the rules and that these were our standard policy terms across the industry. What followed was a string of profanity that would make a sailor blush. I quietly turned down my headset volume and checked my phone messages while she ranted. It's a little-known secret that customer service representatives perfect the art of selective listening during these tirades. Finally, she screamed at me to cancel the policy, calling me a witch before hanging up. The line went dead, and I smiled. She'd just made a crucial mistake. We were required by law to cancel policies when requested by customers, even if they were shouting it in anger. I documented the call, included her exact words, and processed the cancellation. Not even 5 minutes later, I saw my colleague flinch as they answered their phone. I knew immediately who it was and motioned for them to transfer the call to me. I greeted her with the same cheerful tone as before. Karen immediately started yelling, identifying me as the person who canceled her policy. I confirmed that I had indeed processed the cancellation as per her request during our previous call. She tried to claim she hadn't given permission, but I reminded her of her exact words. This only made her angrier, and she demanded that I reinstate the policy. I had to explain that once a policy was canceled, we couldn't reinstate it, but offered to help her set up a new one. She grudgingly agreed, grumbling her acceptance. I started the new policy application process, making sure to follow our script word for word. When I reached the part about pre-existing conditions, explaining that nothing diagnosed or treated in the past 2 years would be covered, she interrupted to ask about her dog's previous conditions. She wanted to know if those would still be covered. I had to break the news that since the previous policy was canceled, all of her dog's medical history would now be considered pre-existing conditions. The explosion that followed was spectacular. She demanded to speak to my manager, which I'd anticipated. I'd already briefed my manager on the situation, and they were ready. My manager calmly explained that I had followed proper procedure and that we were legally required to process cancellation requests. Karen tried to argue that she'd said it in anger and hadn't meant it, but my manager simply reminded her that this should serve as a lesson to think carefully before making such requests. Karen threatened to sue us and report us to everyone she could think of. My manager calmly told her that all our calls were recorded, including her explicit cancellation request, suggesting this might be a good reminder to think before speaking in the future. She tried to get coverage with other pet insurance companies, but of course they all had the same pre-existing condition clauses. Her moment of angry demands had cost her all the coverage she'd built up over years. A week later, she tried to write a negative review online about how we tricked her into canceling her policy. The company's legal team responded by posting the transcript of her cancellation request. I have always been a jack of all trades. By my late 30s, I had jumped between being an information technology specialist, programmer, cook, and retailer. Life has taken me through various paths, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Each job taught me something different, but my college years, those were something else entirely. This story takes place during my college days. I was staying over at my friend's apartment near campus. You know the type. Cheap rent, paper-thin walls, mostly occupied by students. It might as well have been a dorm. The neighborhood wasn't the safest, especially late at night, which is why I often crashed at his place after our Dungeons and Dragons sessions. That one night we had just wrapped up an intense campaign around 1 a.m. My friend and I were total nerds, and proud of it. We were both under 21, more interested in slaying dragons than partying. Everything was fine until 5 a.m. rolled around. That's when it started. The most ear-splitting metal music I'd ever heard, blasting from his roommate's room right next door. I jolted awake, my heart practically jumping out of my chest. I asked my friend what that awful noise was. He casually explained it was just his roommate's morning routine. Shocked, I questioned if this happened every morning at 5 a.m. My friend confirmed it did, mentioning that he'd tried asking his roommate to turn it down. When I pressed about the roommate's response, my friend admitted the guy just told him to get lost. Who plays metal music at full volume at 5 a.m. in an apartment complex? When I asked my friend about how long this had been happening, he told me it had been going on for about 3 months, so regularly you could set your watch to it. This got under my skin, which isn't easy to do. I'm usually pretty laid back, but this was ridiculous. While the roommate was out, we decided to investigate his room. It was a mess, clothes everywhere, empty food containers, but what caught my eye was his stereo system. It wasn't top of the line, but it was decent enough. That's when the idea hit me. We headed to this now defunct electronics store and bought some supplies. The plan was simple but devious. We got some mini speakers and a really long cable. While he was out, we carefully ran the cable under his carpet and connected it to his stereo's output channel, placing the speakers right under his pillow. We made sure to hide everything perfectly. The cables, the connections, everything. But the crown jewel of our plan was a microphone. We waited until he came home and went to bed. Thankfully, he was a heavy sleeper. Once we were sure he was out cold, we snuck back in and turned his stereo to maximum volume. The speakers under his pillow were ready to go. I checked with my friend if he was ready, and he gave me the green light to proceed. We positioned the microphone near his head and connected it to the system. For those who don't know, when you put a microphone too close to speakers playing its own input, it creates this horrible feedback loop. Now imagine that, but right under your pillow at full volume. The screech that erupted was legendary. It wasn't just loud, it was like a banshee had possessed his stereo system. The roommate jumped so high he practically hit the ceiling. He stumbled around his room, hands over his ears, trying to figure out what was happening. He shouted in confusion, demanding to know what was going on. My friend innocently responded by asking if the volume was too loud, claiming he was just getting ready for his day. He couldn't hear properly for the next day. Every conversation became a comedy show, with people talking normally and him constantly asking them to speak up because he couldn't hear them. He never played his metal music at 5 a.m. again. The security company I worked at mainly handled cash services. You know, those armored trucks you see delivering money around town. The branch I worked at was pretty small, just a handful of routes and people. Within 2 years, I somehow became the most senior person there. That should have been a warning sign, but I actually enjoyed it. The boss and I got along great, and the small team made it feel like a tight-knit group. My seniority earned me a whole 60 cents more per hour than everyone else. Wow, right? Everything was going smoothly until this guy showed up. He'd worked with us about a year ago and wanted to come back part-time while keeping his other full-time job. The boss was thrilled about it. He excitedly told me how perfect it was since the guy already knew our procedures and we could use the extra help. I agreed it sounded good and asked when he'd start. The boss said next week and assured me nothing would change with my schedule. That lasted about 3 weeks before everything went sideways. I started noticing my schedule getting shorter and shorter. Instead of my usual 5 days, I was down to 4, and they were all shorter routes. I couldn't even hit 40 hours anymore. When I tried talking to the boss about it, his response floored me. I brought up how my hours had been cut significantly and asked what was going on. He brushed it off, saying they were just trying to accommodate everyone's schedule, like it was no big deal. When I mentioned that I couldn't pay my bills on these hours, he got smug. He told me I was welcome to look for other work if I was unhappy, but claimed I wouldn't find anything better in this area. The smug look on his face when he said that lit a fire under me. I started job hunting that same day. For 2 weeks, I kept quiet and played nice while sending out applications. Then this Monday, I got exactly what I needed. A job offer paying over $1 more per hour, working from home with guaranteed 40+ hours and consecutive days off. When I handed in my notice, the boss's face went through about 5 different emotions in 10 seconds. He couldn't believe I was serious and demanded to know where I'd find better than this. I just smiled sweetly and slid my offer letter across his desk, telling him I'd already found it, and this was my 2 weeks' notice. He started stammering about needing me there and asked who would cover my routes. I simply told him that sounded like a management problem, not mine. They tried to punish me by putting me on driver duty for my last 2 weeks, letting the new guy get more experience. They thought they were sticking it to me, but they actually gave me the easiest job, just driving from stop to stop while someone else does all the heavy lifting. Yesterday, I overheard the boss on the phone with corporate, practically begging for approval to increase the starting wage because nobody was applying for my position. Turns out nobody wants to risk their life transporting millions in cash for barely above minimum wage. Who would have thought? The part-timer who needed my hours, he quit after 3 weeks because the schedule was too demanding. Now the boss has to cover my routes himself because they can't find anyone willing to work for what they're offering. This morning my boss tried one last time. He suggested we could work something out and offered to match my new job's offer. I told him I'd already signed the contract and that it wasn't just about the money anymore. When he asked what that was supposed to mean, I explained that I'd learned something valuable here. Loyalty means nothing if it only goes one way. Tomorrow's my last day, and I'm looking forward to sleeping in on Monday while the boss scrambles to cover my route. This happened yesterday, and I am still super mad. So if there are spelling errors, it's because I'm typing with a lot of fury right now. I've always been the tech enthusiast in my family. My passion led me to a career in the gaming industry, where I now work as a developer. It's a dream job that allows me to work from home at least once a week, which is why I set up the perfect home office/gaming den in my new house. My mother's younger brother's wife, my entitled aunt, has always been annoying and entitled. She expects people to drop everything to help her because she is the wife of the only son in the family. My mom is the oldest, most successful sibling and takes care of my grandparents, but they still favor my uncle more just because he's a boy. My uncle is, for all intents and purposes, a loser. He gambles away his money and borrows from my grandparents when they're just living on Social Security. They have one son who is the most spoiled brat I have ever met. He has been taught his whole life that he does nothing wrong. If he gets in trouble at school, his parents tell him the other kid is wrong. We decided to celebrate Chinese New Year early this year because there was a 3-day weekend, plus the football championship games were happening. I had just gotten a new home and decided to host a celebration. In my house, there's a den that I've dedicated to being my man cave office. The right side is my workstation, and the left is my personal game station, with my gaming PC and consoles, with a nice 40-inch 4K TV. I've worked hard creating this room. When my entitled aunt and her hellspawn, my entitled cousin, arrived, I gave them a tour. Everything my aunt saw she had a negative comment about, despite never having owned her own house. When we reached my den, my entitled cousin lit up and went nuts over my setup. My aunt went straight into ridiculing me. She told me that all of this was a waste of money and criticized me for playing games at my age. I responded by reminding her that I work in the gaming industry and pointed out that there's no age limit to enjoying video games. My entitled cousin started whining that he wanted all of this too. Without a second thought, my aunt walked over to my gaming area and started unplugging things and grabbing controllers. I asked her what she was doing. She replied matter-of-factly that her son wanted my setup, so she was packing it up. I told her that she couldn't take what wasn't hers. My entitled cousin just kept screaming that he wanted it right now. I'm 5'10" inches and over 200 pounds of mostly muscle. My aunt is maybe 5 feet 2 inches, so there's no way she could wrestle anything away from me. I ordered her to put everything back immediately. She reluctantly complied and haphazardly put stuff down. She threatened to tell my mom about my behavior, and I told her to go ahead since my mom hates her anyway. She dragged my cousin out and I closed my office door. Later that evening, while we were watching TV, I noticed both my aunt and cousin were missing. I walked downstairs and found my cousin carrying my PlayStation 4 and other stuff. They were halfway in the garage when they saw me. I yelled at them and they started running to their car. I chased after them, alerting my family. I told my aunt she had some nerve trying to steal from me. She smugly responded that you can't steal from family and that her son needed those games because he was such a good boy. I told her that she wasn't taking anything and I would call the police. She thought I was bluffing, so I called my buddy, who is a cop. Meanwhile, my aunt was screaming, neighbors were watching, and my family came out to block her car. When the police arrived, my aunt claimed she was being robbed. The situation was confusing until my police friend showed up. The other officers asked for proof the items were mine. I showed them my security camera footage of both incidents. My aunt claimed the items belonged to her son. I asked my cousin what he played on his PlayStation 4, and he answered Halo. I explained to everyone that Halo is only available on Xbox, not PlayStation, exposing their lie. The police returned my property and asked if I wanted to press charges. Looking at my aunt, I said yes. They arrested her, but I convinced them to leave my cousin with us. I told the officers I would drop the charges after a week, but I wanted my aunt to sweat it out since grand larceny could mean serious jail time. When she was released, I told her that her actions were criminal and she was teaching her son to steal. She responded that I wouldn't understand because I have everything and they have nothing. I explained that I earned what I have through hard work. I made it clear that she was never welcome in my home again, and if she tried something similar in the future, I wouldn't drop the charges next time. My grandparents tried to make me forgive her, but I stood my ground. My mom backed me up, saying there needed to be consequences for such entitled behavior. My uncle had to borrow money from my parents again to bail her out, but this time my parents made him sign an actual loan agreement with interest. She is now forever banned from my home, and I added extra security cameras just in case. No one messes with my gaming setup and gets away with it. I needed a summer job to help pay for textbooks and living expenses after finishing my first year of college. The local supermarket was hiring cashiers, and since it was only a 10-minute walk from my apartment, I applied right away. The manager seemed impressed by my enthusiasm during the interview, and I was hired on the spot. The first 2 months went smoothly. I learned the register system quickly, memorized all the produce codes, and developed a rapport with the regular customers. I prided myself on being efficient yet friendly. Most customers appreciated my small talk and quick service, often choosing my lane even when others were open. My supervisor had even mentioned promoting me to head cashier if I continued performing well. Everything was going great until that Tuesday morning in July. Tuesdays were typically slow, especially during morning shifts. Most people were at work or had already done their shopping over the weekend. I was halfway through scanning a small family's groceries, a couple with their toddler who always smiled at me when I noticed her. The woman, who I'll call Karen for the sake of this story, was standing behind them, tapping her foot impatiently and checking her watch every few seconds. She had a young boy with her, maybe around 8 or 9 years old. Her cart was overflowing with processed foods, sodas, and various snack items. I finished bagging the family's items and wished them a good day. As they were gathering their bags, Karen shoved her cart forward, hitting the father in the shin. He winced in pain but didn't say anything. Karen muttered under her breath that we had taken long enough, her tone dripping with irritation. I smiled politely, choosing to ignore her comment. Her son pointed at the candy display near the register and asked his mom if he could have a candy bar. Karen immediately shot him down, saying he couldn't have one because he'd get fat, adding that he was already gaining weight. I felt bad for the kid. He wasn't overweight at all, just a normal growing boy. Karen, on the other hand, was considerably overweight, which made her comment seem even more hypocritical, considering the junk food filling her cart. I started scanning her items as quickly as I could. After just 2 items, she sighed loudly and complained about how long it was taking. She explained that her son had a playdate soon, and she needed to go because she didn't like being late. I assured her that I would go as fast as I could. I increased my scanning speed. I'm normally pretty quick. Even with carts containing 70 items, I could finish in about 5 minutes. She had maybe 35 items, so it shouldn't have taken long at all. But before I could even get through a quarter of her items, she sighed again, this time more dramatically. She demanded to know why I was taking so long and accused me of being incredibly rude. She asked if I understood that people have places to be, then demanded that I get my manager immediately. I was shocked. I'd been scanning her items for barely 2 minutes. When I asked what she needed the manager for, she emphasized that she had places to be, speaking in a slow, condescending manner. She claimed to have OCD and said she couldn't handle being late. To prove her point, she grabbed 2 boxed items from her cart and straightened them unnecessarily. The whole OCD claim seemed forced and insincere. She repeated her demand for the manager, adding that she didn't have all day. Not wanting to escalate the situation, I called my manager over the intercom. He arrived quickly, looking concerned, and asked what the issue was. Karen launched into an accusation that I was intentionally moving slowly and that I knew about her OCD but wanted to cause her a panic attack. She demanded to know if that's what he wanted in his store, then insisted he fire me and give her a discount because of the absurd way she was being treated. My manager maintained his composure, despite her absurd accusations. He explained that he couldn't fire me for simply moving slowly and suggested that if she wanted a discount, they had an online system that would give her a lot of coupons. Karen's face turned bright red. She grabbed 2 more boxes and straightened them aggressively, still trying to convince us of her supposed OCD. She expressed outrage at his response, repeating that she had OCD. She then declared that now that she had thought about getting a discount, she needed one, specifically 50% off. My manager began to explain again that he couldn't just give her a discount, but that she could use their online system if she wanted to save money. Before he could finish, Karen slapped my manager across the face. Hard. Everyone nearby gasped. Her son looked mortified and exclaimed in shock, using a curse word to express his disbelief at what his mother had just done. Karen immediately scolded her son for his language, asking him what she had told him about using such words. She then slapped her son for swearing. My heart broke for the kid. Karen started gathering the items on the conveyor belt and the few that had already been bagged, throwing everything haphazardly into her cart. She grabbed her son's hand and began rushing toward the exit without paying, all while yelling obscenities at us and threatening to sue for mental damages and cruelty. As she was about to clear the aisle, I shouted for someone to stop her, explaining that she hadn't paid. An older gentleman who had been shopping nearby looked up, saw what was happening, and ran toward Karen. He grabbed her card, preventing her from leaving, and warned her to stop before someone called the police. My manager was already on his phone dialing 911 when Karen slapped the Good Samaritan. Unlike my manager, this man reacted immediately. He punched her in the stomach. I know hitting a woman is generally frowned upon, but in this situation, it seemed justified as self-defense. Karen doubled over dramatically, screaming that she was pregnant and that the man was a disgusting animal who had killed a child. Her son, who had clearly had enough of her lies, called her out, telling everyone that she was lying and wasn't pregnant. Karen immediately straightened up at that, her pain apparently forgotten, and lunged toward her son with rage in her eyes. Before she could reach him, The Good Samaritan grabbed her, and two other customers came to help restrain her until the police arrived. While the officers took statements, we showed them the surveillance footage that had captured everything. Karen was handcuffed and placed in a police cruiser, screaming threats the entire time. Her son was picked up by his father, who looked both embarrassed and relieved. As the police car drove away, my manager put his hand on my shoulder and told me I'd done well. He instructed me to take the rest of my shift off, with pay. I later found out from a coworker who knew someone at the local courthouse that Karen was charged with assault, child abuse, and attempted shoplifting. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail and lost custody of her son. The father gained full custody and, according to a mutual friend, enrolled the boy in therapy to help process the trauma of his mother's behavior. 2 weeks later, the Good Samaritan came back to the store and gave me a gift card to a local restaurant, thanking me for speaking up. He shared that he had grown up with an abusive parent and couldn't stand by watching history repeat itself. I stayed at the supermarket for another 5 months before finding a better paying job at a local office. While my time there was mostly uneventful, that Tuesday morning taught me more about standing up for what's right than any class ever could. I hope Karen learned her lesson, but more importantly, I hope her son is now living the peaceful life he deserves. I'm a college student working part-time at a coffee shop. After 2 years in crowded dorms, my two friends and I found a beautiful 3-bedroom house with surprisingly affordable rent. The basement was listed as a separate apartment with its own entrance, and the thermostat controlling both units was upstairs with us. For the first few months, everything was perfect. Then the demon moved in downstairs. From our living room, we could hear everything. This woman had no concept of indoor voice. She was probably in her 30s but acted like a dramatic teenager. Every other day, she'd call her mother and scream at her to pay for her cell phone bills. I would hear her yelling that she needed money immediately and couldn't understand how she was supposed to pay her bills without her mother's help. When her mother would respond that she had already sent money the previous week for groceries, the woman would shout back that the money was for emergencies, and this was definitely an emergency. Groceries in her world meant Taco Bell and cheap tequila, and the emergencies were usually when she ran out of booze at 2 a.m. Then there were the boyfriends. She cycled through them constantly. I would hear her screaming at them, demanding to know where they had been and why they'd kept her waiting. When they'd explain they had to work, she'd insist they should have prioritized her needs. Then she would ask if they'd brought what she needed. When they'd mention she still owed them from last time, she would promise to pay once her mom sent money and demand they hand over whatever substance they had brought. The real breaking point came when she brought home 3 puppies. Those poor animals. She'd scream at them for doing normal puppy things like chewing and having accidents. We could hear them crying at night. My roommates and I reported her to animal control anonymously, and thankfully they removed the puppies. She screamed for 3 days straight after that, blaming everyone but herself. We were terrified of this woman, but had stupidly signed a lease making us responsible for all utilities. With only 2 months left, we thought we could ride it out. Then she started smoking. Constantly. According to our landlord, she'd quit for good when she signed her lease, but for good only lasted about 48 hours. Since it was winter, the heat was running nearly 24/7, and all that smoke started wafting up through the vents. Our apartment and belongings began to reek of cigarette smoke. We contacted the landlord because we'd signed for a non-smoking apartment. I explained that the situation was unacceptable because everything smelled like smoke, and mentioned that I had asthma which was being aggravated. He responded that technically in this state, an apartment could be listed as non-smoking even if it shared ventilation with a smoking apartment. When I told him that made no sense, he simply shrugged it off, saying he didn't make the leasing laws, he just followed them. At this point, my 2 roommates were heading out for a 2-week vacation. They were both online students, while I had to be physically present for my classes. This meant I'd be alone with a demon smoker downstairs. After just 3 days of being on my own, I couldn't sleep or eat. My stomach reacted to all the secondhand smoke with constant aches and cramps. My asthma was getting worse and I was coughing all the time. I was miserable, angry, and honestly, a little unhinged from lack of sleep. That's when I made my plan. I checked the weather forecast. Lows in the 20s all week. Perfect. I borrowed my friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag, bought a ski mask, and dug out my warmest clothes. Stocking cap, silk long underwear, woolen socks, and down parka. I stocked up on tea, hot cocoa, and ramen, preparing to live off hot liquids, and then I turned off the heat. Day 1 was magical. Within hours, I heard her stomping around downstairs. Then came the phone call. She was screaming at her mother, complaining that the place was freezing and accusing the landlord of trying to kill her. She blamed her mother for forcing her to move into what she called a frozen crap hole of an apartment. When her mother tried to deny forcing her, the woman insisted that she had, saying her mother had refused to pay rent anywhere else. Day 2 brought a new target for her rage. She was pleading with her boyfriend, telling him she couldn't stay in the freezing apartment anymore. When he told her she couldn't move in with him, she demanded to know why, saying she had nowhere else to go. He explained that his probation officer didn't want him living with anyone. She dismissed this as a stupid reason and dramatically claimed she was freezing to death. On day 3, she escalated to the landlord. I heard her shouting that the heat was broken and demanding he come over immediately. I could hear her yelling as the landlord explained that the thermostat was upstairs and they would need to check with me. She insisted that he call me right away and claimed that what was happening was illegal. By day 4, our landlord was at my door. I greeted him in my full winter gear, looking like I was heading to rob Santa Claus at the North Pole. He asked if I didn't find it a little chilly in the house. I responded that I had found all the cigarette smoke rather warm actually. The landlord mentioned that the downstairs tenant had complained about the lack of heat. I told him that I couldn't help her because I had developed a rare condition that made me sensitive to heat, and my doctor had recommended keeping my living environment below 50 degrees. When he started to object, I reminded him that since we were responsible for all utilities as per our lease, I believed we had the right to set the thermostat to whatever temperature we wanted. He knew I had him there. Our lease gave us control over the utilities we were paying for. He left without another word. Day 5 was when she really lost it. I could hear her screaming to someone on the phone about the witches upstairs trying to freeze her out on purpose. She wasn't wrong about that part. I sat upstairs clutching my car keys and pepper spray was 911 typed into my phone just in case. I was nervous about retaliation, but I wasn't backing down. Later that night, I heard what sounded like good news. She was telling someone named Greg that she would move in with him despite the fact that he had just gotten out of jail for stabbing someone named Travis and lived in what she described as a creepy house in the woods with dogs that bite everyone. Day 6, complete silence from downstairs. I peeked out the window and saw her loading garbage bags into a beat-up truck. She was gone. I silently thanked Greg and his apparently aggressive dogs for taking her away. I waited until I was sure she wasn't coming back, then turned the heat back on. The feeling of warm air flowing through the vents was glorious, especially without the stench of cigarette smoke. When my roommates returned, they couldn't believe my story. We still had to pay her utility usage for the remaining month of our lease, but it was worth every penny to have peace and clean air again. We told the landlord she had moved out, and he actually had the nerve to act disappointed, probably because he knew he'd never find another tenant willing to live in a basement apartment with shared ventilation and no control over the thermostat. For those wondering about the plumbing, yes, I did have a friend who worked in plumbing stop by to give me advice about how low I could let the temperature go before I'd risk burst in the water pipes. I kept it just above that threshold. I might have been desperate, but I wasn't stupid enough to cause water damage. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.